The proceeding was a paid program.
WTOC AM, W236CR, Indianapolis. Praise can be heard all over the city all summer long. It's a faith and family summer on Praise, AM 1310, 95.1 FM, Indy's Inspiration Station.
The following is a paid program. The views and opinions expressed are those of the sponsor and do not necessarily reflect the views of Radio 1, WTLC AM 1310, 95.1 FM, and its management. The Concerned Clergy invites you to their weekly town hall meeting on Praise, AM 1310, 95.1 FM.
All right, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, in 3, 2, and...
Well, EV, electrical vehicles, they're here and they're here to stay. There's a lot of resources, dollars that are floating around in our country right now as due to the President Biden infrastructure program. Each of the states has an opportunity to invest in electrical vehicles, as we do as well here in Indiana. And we're going to be speaking on tonight about that process, how it's going in the state of Indiana. And we also want to hear from you. I put a question out there on Facebook tonight. Do you currently own an electric vehicle, or are you considering an electric vehicle in the near future? So we want to hear from you as we have our discussion on tonight. And we're also going to be privileged to have as a guest, we're going to have Denise Abdul-Rahmad, who has been leading the charge in the fight for the underprivileged when it comes to making sure that electric vehicles are, as far as the charging stations, that they are available for everyone. So we invite you to be part of the conversation on tonight by calling in 317-239-1310, or you can also comment in our Facebook feed. Let us pray. Father God, Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to be with you and to be with one another. Lord, we just pray that you lead, guide, and direct our conversation on tonight, and that everything that we say and do will be pleasing unto you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Well, I'm Reverend Tony Alexander, and I'm glad to be joined tonight by the President, Pastor David W. Green Sr., as well as our guest this evening, Pastor Green, Miss Denise. How are you doing?
Doing good, Reverend Alexander. Good to be with you and Sister Denise. She's my environmental guru. It's the one I depend on when it comes to all issues environmental that's impacting our city and our state. So I'm excited today to be talking about what's going on in terms of charging stations and other items that clearly will impact our environment here in Indianapolis and then throughout the state of Indiana.
Hey, Miss Denise, I'm going to go ahead and ask you if you would. I want to give you an opportunity to kind of introduce yourself before we dive into our conversation, kind of let folks know, as Pastor Green just kind of said, that, you know, you are the environmental guru. Kind of share a little bit about who Denise is, and so maybe our community can grasp exactly what it is that you do and what you're passionate about.
Well, thank you, Reverend Alexander and Pastor Green. It's really great to be here on the Concerned Clergy Indianapolis radio show. I have, and really grateful for all of both of your leadership and the Concerned Clergy's part in really what I consider collective effort. So, you know, not one person can lead a movement or body of work. And so it has been collective genius that has come together to try to make a difference. My background is a passion in environmental climate justice. It's centered around three particular objectives, which is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions or harmful emissions, It's to advance clean energy and energy efficiency and to support our community's livability. I also come from a long line of human and civil rights activists, and so I was able to see that these really are interconnected in my view. Because if you don't have clean water, you can't live. If you don't have clean air, you're not going to be able to live a quality of life. And we also look at a broader context when you think about environmental climate justice. We have the justice on the end, which is to say that, everyone deserves to have beauty in their community and not be within dilapidated housing and not be in violent communities. Their entire environment, a child's environment, is extremely important. And their ability to learn about the legacy that they are inheriting within their community, whether it's them knowing that they live in the history of a Superfund site with lead toxicity, and then we owe it to the next generation. What has turned out to be one of the great challenges of our time, which is us being in what's called a climate emergency. We must prepare our young people for how they can endure and survive the challenges that are already in the atmosphere for another 100 years. And then lastly, I'll just say what happens to be our most threatening situation is also our greatest opportunity. We as Black people lost the first New Deal. And this is a massive amount of funding that's coming down from the Biden administration. It kind of started under the Obama administration with the Clean Power Plan. And there's a massive opportunities for investment in our Black and Brown communities, or what the Biden administration coins as Justice 40, which requires 40% of all of the legislation that the Biden administration has passed, including today, the anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's 1 year anniversary. 40% of those dollars are supposed to come to disadvantaged communities. Well, how do we make sure that this broad definition of disadvantage, which includes low income, it includes other vulnerable groups, rural communities. How do we make sure, though, especially in a state like Indiana or a city like Indianapolis, where African Americans make up about 28% of the population, how do you make sure that some of those monies make it to Black communities, Black and Brown communities? And so that is the charge. And then building what we call a Black to green pipeline for all of those jobs, and making sure that solar is in our communities and electric vehicle charging stations are in our community, and that the air pollution reduces in our communities, and our minority business or Black business enterprises benefit, and so on and so forth. And so this is a body of work that not one person by any means could hold. And there are several grassroots community groups, including obviously the Concerned Clergy of Indianapolis, that are holding important aspects like food justice, which terminology I use is food apartheid condition. But all of it is connected, particularly as we contend with the challenges of climate change.
Well, speaking to some of those, speaking to some of those challenges, there was a report on Channel 8 News here locally that kind of shared, I think this was possibly put out yesterday, but shared some of the concerns based on the challenges that that you have raised, Miss Denise, as well as yourself, Pastor Green. So let me go ahead and share some of that, and then we can speak to that.
vehicle charging infrastructure.
News 8's multicultural reporter Katira Winfrey explains what steps the NAACP says that the state should take to ensure equitable access.
The National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program will impact Indiana, and as it stands right now, there is very limited access to charging stations, and even more apparent in communities of color. NAACP representatives say historically, black communities have seen environmental degradation and fewer infrastructure investments. The NAACP and its allies demand access for all be included in upcoming electric vehicle infrastructure.
It has been 1.5 years on this journey for justice.
INDOT and agencies like the Indiana Utility and Regulatory Commission are finalizing plans on how to roll it out.
A failure by the state of Indiana to include the black community in electric charging stations would mean that the black community would not be starting at the starting line.
The NAACP outlined its 6-point plan and recommendations to ensure an equitable rollout. The 5-year electric charging station rollout is meant to improve range anxiety for electric vehicle drivers by adding stations along highways and in communities.
NDOT must do its part to ensure that all of us are included in this transition to clean energy, because for far too long our communities have been forgotten.
The NAACP is in part asking for transparency, commitment to minority business enterprise, ethnically diverse workforce hiring, place EV infrastructure near minority-owned businesses, and air quality, while also asking that 40% of the funding be used in disadvantaged communities.
These decisions are occurring at a time when there is a historic level of federal funding to invest in EV infrastructure, which can either serve to start to tackle climate change and historic decades of environmental racism, or exacerbate inequities in this state.
Further community input will help determine where stations will be located, as well as regulate rates in terms of service for electric providers.
We in the urban communities can no longer sit on the sidelines.
A plan is expected to be laid out by the end of the year. Reporting in Indianapolis, Katira Winfrey, Wish TV, WishTV.com, and like us on Facebook.
All right, so we saw there the report and a lot of the pretty much the alliance members that you just mentioned, Sister Denise, that have been part, I would say, of the campaign or the fight. Comments were mentioned there as to making sure that communities of poverty, communities of minorities, communities of the disadvantaged, that they are able to have access to the electric vehicle charging stations that are being put in place, Pastor. And I know that's something that has been of great concern, just making sure, Pastor Green, that as the movement for electric vehicles is continuing, that we are able, or our communities are able, to have access to those charging stations also.
Oh, without a doubt, Reverend Alexander, when we look at, and what Sister Denise is saying, is disadvantage that's a somewhat of a vague definition. That's not just black or urban communities, that's rural communities, and we understand that. So we want to certainly advocate for our success in terms of coming to our communities, in terms of the black communities across the state of Indiana. So that includes Gary, South Bend, Fort Wayne, Evansville, Terre Haute. And this coalition is working together because we have voices from all of these areas, because we all share in that concern. And then from a historical position, Sister Denise talked about, we don't want to miss this opportunity. We don't want what happened when they built the interstate through the center of Indianapolis and cut off some neighborhoods and redefined some things from Alexander, for the same thing to happen with this whole EV technology. What is a fact is that where you live, your zip code determines your destiny in Indiana. There are certain zip codes that have been deprived of infrastructure, and you don't live as long. That's just a fact. And so if we want to change that, we're going to have a racial reckoning as a state. And as we're doing these things that's clearly going to impact climate change, we have to address systemic racism at the same time so that we're coming in and helping build and shift some of these things so that your zip code doesn't determine your destiny in terms of, well, your life expectancy is going to be greater if you live here and a whole lot less if you live here. And these things matter. And we don't want to be 100 yards behind the starting line. It's clear that eventually electric vehicle charging stations, et cetera, will get to our communities. That ain't the question. The question is when. Not that it's ever going to come. It's going to come. But the question is, when will it come? And we don't want to be behind it. We want to start with everybody else. So that if there are black men, women who are listening right now who want to be a part of maintenance or construction or design, they should have that right. It shouldn't start 20 years later with children saying, oh, I got this idea. I think I'll get into this EV stuff. No, we need to offer it now because there could be young men, young women who want to go down that path. There may be mechanics today that are working with diesel engines that want to switch. And they have every right to switch to electrical vehicles. And it shouldn't be something that happens 10 years from now. All because somebody woke up and said, oh, we just need more hands on deck. So let's go get those people. Because if you're so far behind, guess what? You won't be the supervisor because somebody else has been there longer than you. You won't be the company owner because you're just getting started and other people got 8 to 10 years experience on you. So for me, we must start right now. Black community should be at the starting line with everybody else, and it has to be intentional.
And it sounds like, Pastor, you're making it clear you're not just looking at the charging stations, but you're looking at the whole entire economic business industry as it is with electric vehicles. And there's so much that is going on with that. When you look at the lithium ion batteries, when you look at even the disposal of the Li batteries, when you even look at attached to that, the chip manufacturing, all of that is going together. And you're absolutely right. We do not want our blacks to be left behind in regards to the entire industry as it is. We do have a call on the line. Let's go ahead and bring in our caller. We have Larry. Is Larry there? Larry,
hello.
Good evening.
All the things that you're talking about right now, as far as this thing with electric vehicles, which are really on their way out now, is already planned for. They knew how much money was going to be appropriated. And a company like Wilhelm, you always say that these companies should teach us to do stuff. They're not going to teach you how to do anything. Business don't do no favors, Pastor Green. We can't expect these established businesses to come out and teach us anything. And as far as the labor force, they already have that. And, I get so sick when you talk about Hispanic people. They don't want anything to do with the blacks. They want us to stay away from them because they have their own language, they have their own businesses, they have their own distribution and stuff for their restaurants. We've been here for all this time, and we don't have one thing going on in this city except complaints when some officer that's chasing some guy with a gun mows him down before he can turn the corner and fire back at him. So, what you guys are talking about, I don't know what your background is, but obviously you don't know anything about corporate business and so forth. It's not to help you do anything. They are going to soak up all that money. They knew it was already coming, and you're already behind the 8 ball. So black people, we don't want to work. We want to talk about racism every time. We need to stop selling racism. It's sick, and every time to see people sit in that studio that have accomplished in life, that are not worrying about paying their bills, and they're talking about racism with a like complaint with the hungry with the loaf of bread under your arm. That's all you guys are doing, and you know what you're actually doing too? You're marginalizing me and making it more impossible for me to do business, because the stuff you're talking about racism, when I go to look at a job or something, all the person's going to say, if I hire him, is he going to call the NAACP on me, which is nothing but a bunch of goddamn poverty pimps. That's all they are.
All right.
I don't care how you look at it, Pastor.
All right.
I don't see how.
Thank you so much for listening, Larry. Now,
I'm not sure he's listening, but let me say this. Anybody that's going to be doing this electrical, a lot of this is going to be training. That's not the corporate company that's doing the training. I mean, we're going to need things in place. I'm hoping that some of our technology organizations, Ivy Tech, et cetera. I mean, we've been talking about STEM. STEM is huge in universities and in high schools. This is where this needs to take place so that young people have an opportunity and hope. This, and then the corporate organizations will, they're going to be looking for people to hire. They're going to be hiring people. Now, will some of those corporations train some people? Smart ones who have enough money will, that are interested in this industry. But we're going to need several people across the board. I mean, you know, my understanding, Reminds, and you can comment on this, is, you know, Purdue's working on charging via the highway. I mean, there's a lot of technology things that are going on, you know, so there's a huge opportunity, and we need our young people and other people as well, you don't have to be young, to be a part of this industry that is not dead, is not over, that I believe Miss Denise would say is just really getting started good. And we know that when the Purdue's and other universities or people that are working in this area are trying to come up with ways to charge vehicles, when all of the big automakers, my understanding, are trying to transition to electric cars, they're not going back to diesel or to gasoline. My understanding, Denise, and you can correct me, is that they're moving towards electric cars or electric vehicles, SUVs, etc. So that is the direction of these organizations, and they're moving away from gasoline, which means this technology is evolving and growing. Miss Denise, am I correct?
I absolutely agree with you, Pastor Green, and I would just add a couple of things. One, you had said that we are in a basically a system change, right? We want racial justice. We're in the era of that. So if we always do what we've always done, then we're going to always get what we've always got. I think is the saying. And I have worked with different groups that are creating equity metrics to corporations, not just internally, not just for hiring, but every aspect that they do. What is their relationship with community? You know, what is their hiring? What is their MBE contracting, you know, status? And so there's many of us that are making corporations accountable too. So even though they might be helicoptering in and collecting all these monies, they need to be held accountable for what they are doing for the Black community and any other community that wants to bring themselves to the table. And then, yes, I mean, you have states like California that have already said that the only cars that will be manufactured in their company, in their state, will be electric vehicles by 2035. And we are talking about every fleet, our commercial fleet is going to be converted to electric vehicles. We need our Black trucking companies to begin to look at what types of funding can help them to convert, or they won't be able to be competitive with the trucking companies that have converted to electric vehicles. We have to look at making sure that electric vehicle, whether it's car sharing and charging stations, are available to our Section 8 housing apartment complexes or multifamily housing, and our young people, making sure that they have access, in addition to electrifying our transit systems and our children's school buses. And where will our public school systems that have predominantly Black and brown children charge up? How are they getting those dollars? And the administration right now does have a clean buses, clean buses initiative right now, where they're giving millions and billions of dollars to school systems or to vendors that own school buses to help them to convert their fleet. So this is happening, to Pastor Green's point. And the question is, and what we are contending with, is how inclusive will it be to our Black and brown communities? And that is the charge, I believe, is before us. And I'll just pivot that it is so much so that we have been in basically three spaces right now. One is we have been holding the Indiana Department of Transportation accountable in where it is placing its charging stations across our highways and across the entire state of Indiana. You know, they could place a charging station with 1 mile to a faith-based institution that might be predominantly African American, or they could place 1 mile to, I always say, barbecue heaven, you know, or to one of our businesses. And because of that electric vehicle traffic coming through, those people might come to our local businesses to get something to eat, to get something to drink, whatever it is, to rest while their vehicle is charging up. So where they are placed in the state of Indiana is important. How the state of Indiana Department of Transportation has done its outreach is important. Is it meaningful? Right now, we don't believe that their outreach has been meaningful. We've also been in the space right now. There is a law that's called PURPA that's come down from the federal government. And this PURPA law says that each state and regulatory system needs to look at its transportation and renewable energy. There's a section called 111D. And this 111D also mentions that they need to show how they're going to be equitable in affordability and access and pricing of these electric vehicles, charging systems, and so forth. And so we have recently, the Indiana NAACP, but we are in alliance with the Indiana Alliance on electric vehicles. We have intervened in this particular case to tell the utilities that, yes, we want them to ensure that electric vehicle charging stations are placed in Black and brown and disadvantaged communities.
All right, now, Sister Denise, because we have to take a break. We have to take a break. But basically, you know, a piece of that is what we're trying to do is just hold them accountable to what they've already committed to, what's been said that they're going to do. So, you know, a big portion of that is it's already been committed to, and we're just assuring that it actually comes to pass. So we do have to take a break. So let's go ahead and take our break. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, you can call in to the radio station. That number is 317-239-1310. 317-239-1310. You're listening to Praise AM 1310 and 95.1 Indy's Inspiration Station. Welcome back to the Concerned Clergy Radio Show. I'm Reverend Tony Alexander, and I have the president with me, President Pastor David W. Green Sr., and as our guest, we have Miss Denise Abdul-Rahmad. She's been joining us, and she's been sharing the work that she's been spearheading and leading in regards to making sure that there's equity in the EV space. And if you'd like to be part of the conversation, you can do that by calling in to the radio station. That number is 317-239-1310. And you can also, if you have a comment or question, you can post it also on our Facebook feed. We do have a caller that's been holding. Let's go ahead and bring in Marilyn. Marilyn, good evening.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Marilyn.
Okay, so I wanted to make a comment because I kind of understand where Larry is coming from. The points that he made were very valid and very real. We've always had to fight for whatever we did. We're always left out, and if we don't fight for anything, we don't get it. So I get that point because look how long electric cars has been out. And then I kind of feel like it's kind of being forced on us. How many of us in our communities can really afford an electric car? Is it going to cost more to go to a station, a electric charging station, than it is to fill up your tank with gas? These are things, how is this going to really impact us?
All right. Well, thank you so much for your phone call, Marilyn, and continue to call in and listen. And I'll let Sister Denise, if you can kind of answer the back end of her question, for sure.
Yeah, that's a great concern, Marilyn, and that's another reason for our advocating, because we want to make sure that affordability and access is there for our communities. And as we build these charging stations, and we know that all of the cars that are going to be for sale are going to be converted over. Do we want to have Black and brown people driving around in diesel on one side of town and those more privileged being able to drive electric vehicles? And then we continue to host the air pollution. We have to pay more at the gas pump because gasoline will become higher. It will cost more because there are less people purchasing gasoline and more people charging up. And then as more people begin to procure electric vehicles, the price point will go down, therefore making it more accessible to us. Also, we're advocating for different share models where you can get access to an electric vehicle, hopefully at a reasonable price, where you're sharing it and using it like a rental system, but they're usually parked like within your community, and you can ride share, you share the vehicle. Also making sure that there's lots of great mass transit that people can get on that is also electrified. So all of that is definitely in the mix. And then lastly, I'll say too, this is the whole picture. I think it was mentioned earlier, they are manufacturing the batteries for these electric vehicles, and they're doing they're doing it in very remote areas, places that we're not able to get access to readily. So how do we make sure that the battery manufacturing is in our districts? How do we make sure that the auto manufacturing is in our district for these electric vehicles so that we can get the jobs? And if we have the jobs for the EV charging, now we have the means, the economic means to be able to purchase an electric vehicle and other things that will improve the quality of our lives. So it's all very connected. And it's not just, place a charging station and there be no benefits to the Black and brown community, because I don't believe placing a charging station alone is the answer. It has to be benefits to our community. So that is what we're working toward.
And also, Denise, correct, there is no commitment yet, right? We don't have a commitment. We're trying to gain one. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, I'll say that, the alliance that was formed, we created a 6 point plan. And we had presented this 6 point plan again, both to the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, who regulates our electricity and all of our utilities. And we've also provided the 6 point plan to the Indiana Department of Transportation. We probably presented it to legislators. Um, and this 6 point plan says, hey, we want to know how you are doing as it relates to moving equity and hiring. We want a dashboard. We want you to be intentional about contracting Black business enterprises, because minority business enterprises can mean women and veterans and other people of color. We want them to commit to workforce training and hiring and apprenticeships and giving folks a fair chance that are our returning citizens. We're wanting a commitment to those charging stations in our communities, and we want our grids repaired, because many of our grids, we have a lot of power outages. And this is also an opportunity to lean into some clean energy. And we want them placed near our under-resourced schools and faith-based. We want them to commit to the reduction of air pollution, and we want them to commit to an equity advisory board to be made up of some Black and ethnically diverse persons. Right now, there's no one that looks like me. The last time we checked, that is even on their working group, and they've not created a equity advisory board. These are the things that the Alliance for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion of EV infrastructure and economic opportunity have been demanding. We've got minimal results. There are some minority business enterprises that have been contracted. They did put some mapping up. But they've never requested a meeting with us. Every meeting we've had to reach out to them. And same with the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. Not that we've reached out to them, but there's a process that's happening right now that does not ensure equity. And what equity means to you might be different to me. So unless you're listening to us, listening to community to hear what we want by way of equity, then it's not equitable. There's about to be a situation where we are saying that this is what we want, and we're hoping by September the 5th that we will have been effective as an alliance through the NAACP intervening basically on behalf of the alliance through the great leadership of concerned clergy, the IMA, the Black Lives Matter, some of the Chamber of Commerces across the state, lots of the NAACP units, and businesses, some that are forward-facing, some that aren't. Even the Indiana Black Legislative Caucus has been supportive to this alliance and participants.
Okay, so we do have to take our next break. Let's go ahead and do that. And then when we come back, Pastor, you can go ahead and you can make your next comment or the question that you have for Miss Denise. So we've been talking about the electric vehicle space and the electric vehicle charging stations that are now getting ready to be put up across the state, as well as the entire electric vehicle infrastructure industry. We've been discussing exactly the work that Ms. Denise is doing, along with so many other partners, in regards to making sure that this is equitable and that we are able to experience all the greatness that should come from electric vehicles. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, you can call into the radio station. The number is 317-239-1310. You're listening to the Concerned Clergy Radio Show on Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM, Indy's Inspiration Station. Welcome back to the Concerned Clergy Radio Show. I'm Reverend Tony Alexander, and I have President Pastor David W. Green Sr. with me. And as our guest this evening, we have Miss Denise Abdul-Rahmad. She's been sharing in regards to electric vehicles. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, you can call into the radio station 317-239-1310, or you can comment in our Facebook feed. And just for clarity's sake, I do want to say when I was speaking to commitments, it was about when all of these dollars were coming to the states, we had commitments that we were going to be included. Minority business enterprises were going to be included. So on the front end, there were certain commitments that this was going to happen. And we found that none of that's going on. And the work of the Alliance has added some additional items they want to see there. And I think those are some important items that we want to make sure are included. Now, just before our break, Pastor, I think you had either a question or comment that you were going to make right before we had to go to our commercial break.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to the last caller's concern in the sense of let's not miss that this is about infrastructure. It is not whether or not you're personally going to purchase an electric car, even though down the line you might feel somewhat forced into it. But I mean, some older people, I'm sure, are not going to want to do that. But it's about infrastructure. And that infrastructure includes your electrical stuff. It's going to be, some people are going to have underground electrical wires. So just because the wind's blowing, their electricity will be on. While some of the other areas, these zip codes that don't enhance your destiny, they'll still have all the old stuff. That includes internet, your cell phone. You'd be like, why is mine not working? Why is the internet when we talk about infrastructure to support this is not just one item. This is not just about an electric car. This is infrastructure. What's in the zip code? What's in the community that we can benefit from? That our power stays up. That it doesn't go down, and we're not out. Or when there are outages, we're not out as long. It's about internet and what's going on with high-speed internet. Where are you? I mean, if we got to wake up and recognize, because there's a large sum of money committed. If white people want it, they want it for a reason. And we would be wrong to say now, oh, we don't want that. We don't think we're ever going to need that. That would put us way behind the starting line. I'm trying to get us to see it's about infrastructure. There's a big picture here. And if we don't have that infrastructure, which is what some people are saying now, we don't want to invest in certain zip codes. Why? The infrastructure is not good enough. It'll be more expensive to invest in that community, in that neighborhood, because of the infrastructure, because it's old. They want to go somewhere it's new. The power is more stable, which Rem Alexander knows all about. That you want it more consistent. We don't want to come over here where it's old lines, old pipes, old everything, old cabling. They don't want to do that. And we're saying, no, you need to upgrade the infrastructure in these zip codes. And probably most importantly, and because I see this, Sister Denise, all the time, when you're in those zip codes where the infrastructure is not there, all this gas, etc., those kids got asthma, lives are being short. This makes a difference. I mean, and so you yourself, maybe as a senior or some older person, I'm not into electric cars. Think about the health of other people, that grandchild. But why they got asthma? Why's all this? Why there's these breathing problems? Why all that? Because it's coming from the environment. And if we don't start to clean up the environment, it is those zip codes it's going to see destiny cut short, people dying, people dealing with health issues that we could help clean up by saying We want this infrastructure in our neighborhoods. And I see it because we have an academy. Kids that are, the inhalers everywhere at 3 and 4 years old, needing inhalers. What are we doing? And if we put them back in these environments filled with pollution and all these other things, that's some of the reason we don't want to clean up the infrastructure, what we might find in the ground, right? That we have to deal with because it costs more money, Miss Denise. And what I'm saying, we need to clean that up. What's in that ground needs to get cleaned up because our people are breathing it. This is about the life and death of many times of African Americans. This is not about whether or not you're going to buy an electric car. I mean, that's a whole nother question. The bigger issue is we need to be concerned about our environment. We need to be concerned about the healthcare. We need to see this is about infrastructure for the Black community. Like I said when we started, you're eventually going to get there, but do you want to get there way late, still breathing the same old stuff, people dying, and being forced into it because you wake up and say, well, this is just costing so much because they've elevated gasoline prices out the roof. Because I'm always there. If all these other people want it, I know it's not to our advantage to be sitting over here saying, well, we really don't care. No, we need to care. We need to understand it.
Well, Pastor, I think our community also needs to recognize when there are advances in technology, in a lot of cases, those advances are going to keep coming. They're going to continue. They're advancing. And we had early on with the internet, there was such a digital divide between, those who could afford, internet accessibility and those who couldn't. And it's taken a long time for us to, somewhat get up there to where there's not such a digital divide. This is an area in which we could easily find ourselves in another have and have not situation, that creates another divide in our communities for, the latest and greatest technology. And we should not want to deprive ourselves in our communities of technology as it is advancing. And Sister Denise, I also want our community to know, be assured, this is not a trial, it's not temporary. Electric vehicles are here to stay. Community, you just got to grapple with that.
Yeah, I also want to say that, this is free money from the federal government, from your tax dollars. We have the right to have this investment, this infrastructure in our community. You cannot tell us because the systems have been neglected for over however many years because of the lack of investment that we have to continue to bear the burdens like we do in every other system in this nation, including, we could get into power plants. We host those. We bear the burden of mass incarceration, or children identify by the time they're in third grade that they're going to mass incarceration. We are bearing the burdens, the vulnerabilities of this system, like COVID. We were the ones that were most vulnerable to COVID. So when are we priority and when are we first? And, justice is always, the time for justice is always right now. And that's what we are fighting for, and after EV charging, there's lots of other areas that we have to ensure that our communities benefit from.
And let me say this also, Pastor and Denise, there are some who represent our utility companies that would just as well not provide that infrastructure for the underserved communities. And that's something you have also spoken out against, is where we've got those representing the utility companies that are actually talking about the importance of the infrastructure, the fact that it's a great thing that we can have electric vehicles, but at the same time, they're saying they're not necessarily sold on putting them in areas where communities of color or where there are disadvantaged folks in those communities.
Well, clearly, I mean, Reverend Alexander, as I know, uh, Miss Denise is in a legal situation there in for the fight. So I'll chime in and say what is occurring, what I feel is egregious. I mean, and I understand it from a business standpoint. I had 20 plus years with IBM, and I understand technology. That's another reason why I'm intrigued by this whole electric vehicle thing. But you got organizations that are saying we don't want to invest in these areas because it will cost more, and it will cost more because when you're going into an area that's been neglected for 100 years, it's going to cost more to go in there and do some of the same things. And what we're saying is we don't want to see that replicated where we continue to build the infrastructure out in all the rich areas that already have, for example, their electric lines are already buried. They're not in trees. I mean, they're not on poles and running through trees. They're buried. They got the latest stuff. They don't have anything to worry about in terms of the ground and et cetera. So that company is saying from a finance situation, well, we don't want to come in here and do something that would be a lot more work. Well, we're saying you need to right the ship. That you do need to come in and address it. That there needs to be a racial reckoning. If you're going to do this quote unquote climate change work, you got to balance that. Now, whether the state's going to pay it or somebody else is going to put it in there, it has to be put in there intentionally where somebody can say, yeah, this area's been neglected. You know, and so we're going to intentionally come into this zip code and we're going to do this unapologetically. We know that their internet speed ain't the same as others. We know that their electric lines have aged out. We know all, and we're going to come in and fix it, not just tap into an easier locale that has everything there already, and we can almost just put up a station with minimal work. I understand business that's cheaper, but if we're going to address the human issues and other issues in here, we have to intentionally invest in areas that have been neglected, and we owe to stand up for that. And I applaud Denise, because I know our time is about out, Reverend Alexander. I applaud Denise and others that are part of our coalition for being willing to say, hey, wait a minute now, you need to intentionally do this unapologetically. I understand business and that it may cost you more, but we owe these communities that have been neglected for years because they sacrificed and gave up a ton of money and helped other people. We owe it to them, and we can do that. And Mr. guess what? In the end, we'll be all right.
All right. And we need folks like Ms. Denise definitely leading that charge and helping us as we understand the entire industry as well as what the state is doing here in Indiana. So we just want to thank Mr. Denise Abdul-Rahmad once again for joining us on tonight as we talk about the electric vehicles. We're going to continue to share information. We're going to continue to fight for the communities, and we're going to continue to bring that information to you. So we just want to say for everyone, have a blessed night, and we'll see you